Hey everyone, my name is Rob Phelan, also known as the FI Educator Online, and today is going to be about setting financial goals. Now, you've set goals before. We've all heard set SMART goals, and those can apply to most areas of our lives, but very few times do we actually talk about specifically goals that have to do with money and our finances. How do you set a personal finance goal? What does that look like? What are the different types of goals we should set? How do I measure my success if I've done it or not? These are all questions that you had and I had as well. And I wanted to bring on an expert to talk about how do we actually set financial goals. And now when you think about like who is the expert to talk about this, a financial coach is exactly what you think. It's a coach for your money. And a financial coach, we really wanted someone who's going to say like, hey, here's how you take where you are and get to where you want to be. And Rachel Covert, who's going to be my guest today, is a financial coach from Rachel Talks Money, and she is the best expert I could find to talk about this particular topic with us. So Rachel, how are you doing?
Hey, Rob, I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for having me today.
Of course. So Rachel's calling us all the way from Portugal, which is one of the coolest things that I can think of about Rachel because she's done the FI thing, the financial independence thing, where she decided that, you know what, I want to leave where I'm at. I want to go live somewhere else, maybe where the cost of living is a little cheaper and I can make my money stretch further. And she actually did it. Like a lot of us talk about this. It's one of my goals at someday to move abroad and live a cheaper life somewhere else. But Rachel actually did it, which is always nice to see someone leading that life. And Rachel, your bio is really cool. It's like you were really into fashion when you were younger, lived the fashionista lifestyle, worked in fashion, and then you somehow ended up working in finance. Tell us a little bit about how that happened.
Yeah, so Rob, I don't know if I'm dating myself here, but I worked in fashion for 15 years, and there is a movie called The Devil Wears Prada. So maybe some of your students haven't heard of this because I'm old, but The Devil Wears Prada is a super accurate depiction of what it's like to be a fashion designer. It's super hectic. You work lots of hours. People scream at you all the time. And when I was 29, I got diagnosed with a condition called rheumatoid arthritis, and I realized, oh my goodness, I am wasting all of my most healthy, valuable years making money for somebody else. And so I realized that there are lots of ways to make your money grow. And I just needed to get educated about how to do that and implement some systems and some strategies. And so I got really interested in money, and I realized that, you know what, we're not actually teaching money to people out there in the world. And so eventually, after successfully learning how to save and invest for myself, now I teach other people how to do it through my coaching program.
And that realization, I think, is something that a lot of people have at some point. Less so in the public sector, where I look at my job and I don't think I'm making X number of dollars from my employer. But in the private industry, so you're working for a private employer, you might say, look, I'm responsible for bringing in $100,000 of revenue, but I only get paid 40. And you might be like, why can't I just do that for myself and just keep the full 100,000? That's a big moment for a lot of people where they might start shifting to this idea of entrepreneurship or having their own side career, side hustle. So just something to think about as you guys move into the future. If you're building these skill sets working for an employer, could you just start working for yourself and making more? It's a great conversation to have with yourself at some point, but that's not today's focus. We want to stay in our lane today. If you're watching the replay or you're joining us live, welcome. Make sure that you have your copy of the student reflection sheet that goes with this. And the first question is just, before we start, what is your when was the last time you set a goal and what did that look like? And were you successful with it? Why or why not? So just kind of quickly branch into, have I set goals before? How did it go? Am I the kind of person who sets goals, like maybe a New Year's resolution, but I never actually stick to it? If so, do I know why not? And then C, can you get some clarity today as to what you could do different or how you could do it better? And if you've never set a goal before, then obviously your goal for today is to figure out, how do I do this and what should I include in my goals? So Rachel, first place I want to go is, we're specifically focusing on financial goals. What are some types of financial goals we could set? Like, what are the realms where we can start setting goals?
Yeah, so there are lots of different types of financial goals, but we'll start with some simple ones that maybe you guys would be more familiar with. First thing you might want to set is a savings goal. That might be to save money to buy something like a new phone or a car or a trip you might want to take. You could also set goals for As you get older, you'll be setting goals for things like saving for retirement, which is an investment goal. You could be setting income goals, right? Like this is something maybe that as teenagers you haven't thought about yet, but actually as you get older, your income is going to have a big impact on your lifestyle and your choices that you're able to make. So you may want to be thinking about, okay, how much money am I going to try to earn so that I can have these, things that are important to me in my life?
Yeah. And I think even when we think about savings, there's the dollar amount. So like I want to have $1,000 in my savings account by this date. But there's also the habit or the process goal as well. So like I want to start a habit of saving 10% of my income or $5 every paycheck or $10 a month. Like there are lots of different goals that you can set around saving or investing or your income. Like I want to raise it 10%. I want to raise it $5. I want a second stream of income. So lots of different things that you can do around these headings that we've got here, and investing,
And
same idea.
can I just add, Rob, one thing you just said was you said, okay, I could save, $5 or $10 from each time that I get paid. Or you could say, I'm going to save 10% or 15% so that you're always saving the same portion of money, but that it'll grow depending on how much money you're earning. So as your income goes up, your savings will go up alongside it, right? So there's different ways you can look at that as well.
So like, for example, as a teacher, I get a small pay rise every year if things are going well. And my wife and I have a pay yourself tomorrow goal. And what this means is that like, I've got my fixed income right now. It's hard for me to raise my savings rate because we've already kind of trimmed where we could. So the only way that I'm going to increase my savings rate is when my income goes up. So what we do is every time that raise comes in, we try and say, okay, we were saving 10%. Let's try and bump it up now to 11. So we're going to absorb more of that raise, but we never actually missed the money because we never had it in the first place. So it's a nice time to start increasing that. So that's our goal, is to increase our savings rate as our income goes up as well. All right. So second up for us, in still sitting in the types of goals, we've got time scale that we can put on these goals. So we've got short, medium, long-term. Is there any other time scales that you would put on goals as we're thinking about them?
Well, some goals have a deadline too. So you have your short-term goals. Often those are goals that have a closer deadline. So I know a lot of folks watching this might be students. Some of the goals you might have might be things like saving money for a vehicle, saving money for a phone, saving money for college. So those would be for you guys probably short to medium term goals, but they also have a deadline, right? So, and that length of time that you have between now and when you would like to have that goal met is another way of looking at having a financial goal. So you have your short-term goals, which are things, as you get older, maybe short-term becomes a little bit longer, but when you're a student, maybe it's 6 months to a year or 2 years. Medium term might be, 2 years to 5 years. And then long term as a student would probably be more than 5 years. As an adult, sometimes when we look at these things, maybe long-term goals are more than 10 years, right? So your age might play a role in what feels like a short-term goal versus a long-term goal as well. But that's, I think, the two most important things to think about here is the length of time and whether or not you have a deadline for when you want to have it. So if you want to have a car on your 16th birthday and you are 14 and a half today, okay, I've got a year and a half to save up the money to get that car.
Yeah. And it's important to backward map in those scenarios. So like in a year and a half, I want to be able to pay for a $5,000 car. I've got a year and a half to save $5,000. So you would do your 5,000 divided by 18 months, and that's how much you would have to save per month. Or by 36, if you get paid twice a month, so you know how much each paycheck needs to be set aside. And that could be a great way to start setting a savings goal. Like I'm going to put aside $500 every month for however many months. And by the end of that, I should have close to my savings goal, whatever it is. Okay. So in terms of what is a good way to start setting a goal? So we talked about like the ones like I want to have a car, but like how else would you think about creating those endpoint goals?
Yeah, so I think for me, when we're thinking about the goal, there's kind of two different types of goals, right? There's these very concrete goals that have a timeline, like I want a car for my 16th birthday or my 18th birthday. And then there's these longer term goals, like what we were talking about earlier, where Rob was talking about his savings rate, right? So that's a different type of goal. And that's a goal where you are trying to reach a higher achievement, and it doesn't necessarily have a deadline, right? So I think that's kind of how I personally think about these two types of financial goals. And a lot of times when we're looking at something like savings rate, for example, and we'll use the example of, let's say that you're currently saving 10% of the money that you earn in your, maybe you have a side hustle, maybe you babysit, or maybe you have a job in a store or at McDonald's or something. Maybe you're saying, okay, right now I'm saving 10%, but I know that over the summer when I don't have school, I'm going to work a lot more. So I want to set a goal to increase that from 10% to 20%, right? So there are two different types of goals, and they can be seasonal, right? They can relate to the chapter that you are currently in right now in your life. And so that's kind of how I think about these things. I break them down to goals that have a timeline and goals that are based on, say, percentage or volume, if that makes sense.
And where would you record these goals? Are you just thinking about them? Like, how would you do the process of actually writing a goal down or creating a goal?
Yeah, I personally would 100% be writing it down. Now, maybe you are a person who does well with a pen and paper. You could even I'm sure you all have a notebook, like a pretty little notebook or a cute little notebook that you got as a gift at some point. You could start to use that as your goal tracking notebook. So you might want to say, okay, what's my total goal? And like you said, Rob, if it's a time-based goal where it's like maybe a phone or a car or saving for college, you're going to work backwards. You're going to say, okay, I want to have, let's say, $5,000 to have for spending money for my first year of, community college, let's say. So you're going to say, okay, I've got 2 years to do that. I'm going to take that $5,000 and I'm going to break it down either monthly, or maybe you only work in the summer. You're going to figure out how much you need to save in the summer, and you just do the arithmetic. It's not as complicated as it might sound. You can just use division to figure out how much money you need to save per time period. And then what I like to do is I like to give myself either a checklist or just draw myself a little picture and just color it in as you fill it up. You can draw a thermometer, you can get creative with it. You can use stickers, you can make it fun. And so particularly for time-based goals, I absolutely like to track it. Now for a percentage-based goal, right, with something like that, you're going to track that with each time you get paid. So I like to kind of keep a little list. So every time I get paid, I can say, okay, from this money that came in, I know that 15% of that money is going towards my retirement savings, for example. Now, as teenagers, we'll probably talk about this in a minute, but maybe you're not saving for retirement quite yet, and you're saving for things like, going to community college or university, or a big trip after you graduate. And so you would want to keep track of every time you receive money and how much of that money you put towards that savings goal. That's what I would do, Rob. What about you?
I do the app on my phone, the Notes app. So it's,
Okay.
it's quick, it's easy to access, which I like. And I think that's an important thing, is that you should be able to find your goals and maybe check in on them on a regular basis. But yeah, like you said, I've got the time horizon in mind. I try and keep that SMART goal acronym in my head, even though we've all heard it a lot. It actually really works well for setting goals. So it's got to be something specific. Like, it can't just be, I'm going to save more money. Well, how much is more? How do you know if you've done it or not? So like, that's a really important thing for me. It's got to be measurable. Same thing. Like, okay, I need to know, have I hit this goal or not? So it's X number of dollars, percentage of my income. I've put money into a savings account 5 times this year. Whatever the measurement is, there has to be something that you can measure to say that, yes, I did it, or no, I didn't. Because for me, it's a checklist in my Notes app. So like, when I achieve the goal, I get to check it off. So I need to know, when am I allowed to check this off or not? I've got goals that are year long. I've got goals that are 5 years long. And sometimes when I do the 5-year ones, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to achieve this goal in 5 years, what do I need to achieve this year to get to that goal? So I have these kind of checkpoints like you talked about. I love the visuals. So we had savings thermometers when we were paying off debt on like our cars and our student loans. So we would just like scribble in as we paid off our debt. My son does savings goals. He's 5, and we will usually draw a picture of what he's saving for. And then we'll put little bubbles on it. And every time he fills in like a bubble, it's the equivalent of $1 or $2 or $5 or whatever it is. And that's a really great visual to have of, how close am I to getting to this goal? Because I think the hard part a lot of times is that we lose motivation for it, especially if it's not something that you can do very quickly. Like, if this is something that's going to be going for a long time, what tips would you have for staying motivated on a goal?
Yeah, I love that question. So the first thing I would say is, if you keep track of your progress towards the goal, it helps you to stay motivated and feel successful. So I think feeling successful is one of the best ways to stay motivated. And in my opinion, when you have a very specific goal in mind, it's really important to measure your progress backwards. So let's say that you have a 4-year goal of saving enough money to pay for your first, year of college or something. So you want to say, okay, well, I'm in year 2 of that goal. How much of this goal have I saved so far, and how much do I have left? Right? Instead of just saying, oh, well, I should try to save more for college. I should probably open a savings account or something like that. You're not actually going to get started, and you're not motivated because you can't measure your progress backwards and say, hey, wow, look at that. I've already saved $1,000 and it didn't even feel that hard, right? So for me, staying motivated is important to see that I'm making progress towards the goal. It's also, I think, great to have some accountability, right? So if you have a person you feel comfortable sharing your financial goals with, whether it's a parent, a sibling, a friend, and if that person also has financial goals, and here's a secret, everyone probably does and should have financial goals. So having an accountability buddy who you can share those goals with, and have an honest conversation. Hey, I didn't do so well this month. I kind of lost sight of my goals. Here's some things I was thinking that might help me to get back on track with achieving those goals, can be super helpful too. And I think that there's a little bit of discomfort sometimes talking about money, and you'll find even adults have a hard time talking about money. But the thing is, we are all using money, especially as adults, 7 days a week for your entire life. So getting comfortable being able to share those goals, if you have a partner, a boyfriend, or a girlfriend, being transparent and having someone else to help to hold you accountable. So you're both measuring it and you're being honest with yourself and your accountability buddy on your progress towards those goals.
Yeah, super important to have those conversations with any sort of partner. Like, what are your goals and what are my goals, and how are we achieving those goals together or supporting each other in achieving our goals? And then having somebody else. Like for me, it's my wife, of course, but also I have like a mastermind group that I'm a part of for my business, but we also talk about personal financial goals. And that's something that we just check in with each other like every 2 weeks, like, hey, how's it going? Are we still keeping that goal in mind? Are we moving towards it? Having a assigned date in your calendar where you're like, I'm going to revisit my goals and see like, how did I do for last year? And I'm going to set new ones for next year. I see a lot of coaches talk about doing like goal setting dates with yourself, like that you create a fun experience around it, and you maybe get some food in, or you go out to a restaurant or a cafe and you do this together, and you make it a fun experience to talk about goal setting and dreaming together. And that's a great way to kind of just make sure you're aligned with other people. And then also you have that accountability person. I also know so many Instagrammers and influencers kind of built their accounts because they publicly declared what their goal was. Like we think of Tori Dunlap with like her first 100K, like it was all about getting to 100,000 in income, I think. And once she surpassed that, she just kept going. Or people are paying off debt. They're talking about building wealth or budgeting or whatever it is. And just doing it on social media kind of makes yourself stick to it, because you're publicly declaring that this is what I'm doing, and you don't want to publicly admit that you didn't make it. And so that can be that accountability sometimes. But I do want to come back to what happens if we don't make it, or if we think we're not going to make it. But first, I want to do today's trivia. So if you're not familiar with the trivia section, we are going to show a video here that's going to ask you a question. I want you to try and guess as close as you can without going over what you think the answer is. And you do have a space on the back of your reflection sheet to put your answer. And Rachel, I'm going to ask you yours too. So hope you're ready.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so we are recording this on St. Patrick's Day, which is why it's St. Patrick's Day themed on our question. But how much does the average U.S. household spend on St. Patrick's Day festivities in 2024? So what did they spend on average? So write down your answer without going over, and we'll check back in on the answer at the end of today's segment. Got an idea, Rachel?
I wrote something down, but it was a total guess. I don't know.
All of these are total guesses. You're trying to like think about like, well, what do I know about the situation? Maybe how much do I spend, or do I think my family spends? Is that a good measure of the average? And then you kind of base your answers off of something like that. It's a good logic problem as well, which is why I like these style questions. But we said we were going to talk about what happens if I think I'm not going to make it. So I set this very ambitious goal at the start of the year, and I'm getting towards the end of the year. I'm like, you know what? We're going to fall very short of this. Am I a failure, or what would you do?
Yeah, so I would start by saying when you set a goal, just because you didn't accomplish the goal, in my opinion, you're not a failure, right? If you actively worked towards that goal and you made progress towards it, I don't believe that you're a failure. Now, a couple things that you can do is number one is look backwards on the situation and just ask yourself, not with judgment, just as an observation. Okay, why do I think I did not hit this goal, right? What are some of the things that I could have done differently? And the reason this is really important, and I think this is something that maybe we forget as we move through life, is that we're always learning. And so especially if you are new to setting financial goals, new to saving money, let's say, in general, you may not hit that goal, right? But this is also probably one of your first attempts at doing it. So being kind to yourself and asking yourself in an observational way, okay, what am I going to do differently next time? How can I improve on achieving my goal? And what went wrong, right? What do I think were the factors that held me back from being successful with it? And be honest with yourself. Was it that you just weren't motivated? You weren't disciplined? You didn't try hard enough? Or was it that extenuating circumstances came up? Maybe the family you usually babysit for moved away, or you ended up getting, I don't know, strep throat and you were sick a lot and couldn't work during the time period you anticipated working, right? Just simply observing what went sideways and what could you maybe do differently next time is going to actually give you the tools that you need so that when you go back to try to get to that goal again, you can be successful. And in addition to that, if you've been doing what Rob suggested earlier and you've been checking in with yourself, whether it's a weekly date, a monthly date, a quarterly date, however you want to do it, but having a bit of a money date with yourself or yourself and your accountability partner, you'll know along the way if you're starting to miss your target, right? And if you're starting to miss your target, you can say, all right, what are some of the changes, the pivots I need to make today that are still going to help me get either to my goal or pretty darn close to my goal, rather than waiting all the way to the end and being disappointed and blindsided that you didn't get to that goal, right? It's holding yourself accountable along the way so that you don't have this major disappointment at the end of your kind of timeline.
I think that's an important one too, is that I think a lot of us lock ourselves into the idea that we set New Year's resolutions. Like New Year is probably one of the most common times in the calendar to set goals. And we feel like, okay, I've got a year to accomplish this. There's no adjusting in that time. And what we don't realize that, well, actually at any point in the year, you could just stop, reset, and redo your goals or update your goals or adjust your goals depending on how things are going. Like you don't have to wait for New Year's Day to come around or the end of the school year or the start of the next school year or the end of summer, whatever it is. Like there are multiple, I mean, there's an unlimited number of times during the year that you could do this, but setting yourself those money dates or those quarterly goals, so quarterly, like every 3 months, that's a great way to kind of just assess, like, am I on track? Do I need to reset a goal? Do I need to do something totally different? Do I need to abandon this goal? And don't wait an entire year to do that. Another thing that popped up that you said was like the type of goal you're setting. And I think this kind of comes down to the type of person you are, how well you know yourself. I know some people will set a variety of goals. Like there'll be really easy ones to hit. Like I want to save $100 in my savings account. And like, I know I'm going to do that. I could do that next week probably. And they like just having something to check off that makes us feel like we've been successful. And then there are some people who set these BHAGs or big, hairy, audacious goals, and they're almost unachievable. They're like pushing beyond what you think you actually could do. And they know that I'm going to aim for this super high goal. And even if I don't make it, I'm going to be way further ahead than where I was. And I'm totally okay with not actually hitting that number. So you might probably fall somewhere in the middle between those two mindsets, and making sure that you're setting goals that are achievable for yourself. Like don't set something that is totally out there unless you're very okay with that idea of I might not make this, but I know I'm going to be way further ahead when I do measure myself at the end. So like, is there anything else you would add to that, Rachel, in terms of like knowing yourself or the type of goal you set?
Yeah. So I think one thing that we want to emphasize is that your goals, you set a goal, but you can also adjust those goals as you're going along. So I'm actually more of a BHAG goal setter myself. I like the big, hairy, audacious goals because I like to push myself a little bit to get creative and to think, okay, how could I make this imaginary goal happen, right? And let's say it's a huge goal. Like let's say that you are a freshman in high school and you want to save $50,000 for college by the time you graduate, right? That's a lot of money. But if you set yourself the goal of saving $5,000, you might be really happy to have saved $5,000. But if you set that goal of $50,000 and you save $25,000, you have 5x your results, right? So one thing that you might want to do is set a BHAG for yourself and say, okay, and when I was working in fashion, we'd call this a stretch plan or a reach plan. So what's that goal that feels a little bananas? Like I might not get that goal, but if you got it or you got close to it, you would be throwing yourself a party, right? So it's important to kind of have that goal and then maybe have, okay, what's my SMART goal? What's my realistic goal? Because sometimes when we look at our realistic goals, it doesn't really push us to get creative if we're just always staying in our lane and staying in our comfort zone. So for myself as a financial coach, I like to ask my clients, okay, but what if it does work out, right? What if I do achieve this goal? Then how would I feel in that circumstance? So having a bit of a range for your goals may also be something that helps to push you to be a little bit more creative with how you're going to accomplish those goals.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I love the big goals that are going to really push me beyond. And I usually get to the end of the year and I've probably hit maybe half of my goals that I set at the start of the year. And that's totally fine with me. Like I'm doing that check-in. I'm liking the progress I'm making. I still want to keep that big goal. I don't really want to dim it down because I do want to keep pushing and seeing, can we make it? But knowing as we get closer and closer, okay, it's probably not going to happen, but hey, what I did achieve is pretty darn good too. So that's always nice to know as well. All right. So let's move. Is there anything else you want to add on goal setting before we move into the Q&A, Rachel?
Let me think. Is there anything I want to? The only thing that I would say is don't be shy. Don't assume that just because you have never set a financial goal or you don't feel like that's who you are, you don't feel like you're good with numbers, you don't feel like you're good with money. All of that is kind of not reality, right? You're going to have to use money every day of your life as an adult, and getting comfortable with the idea that you have skills, you have the power to be good with money, you have the ability to set these goals and move in the right direction, right? A lot of this has to do with being on the right trajectory towards the financial well-being that you want to have in your life as an adult, right? You don't want to have financial stress. You want to have abundance. You want to have the ability to buy things and travel, right? So don't just come into the process of goal setting and say, well, I'm pretty bad at this. Like maybe I should just try to set a goal of saving, $5 a month or something. Come into it, pumping yourself up, making yourself think, you know what? If Rachel can do it, if Rob can do it, I can do it, right? Because setting financial goals, in my opinion, really truly is for every single person. And getting comfortable with the idea that maybe you don't think you're good with money, it's just like learning how to cook, right? Right now, maybe you couldn't, I don't know, make an entire Thanksgiving dinner all by yourself, but someday you will be able to, right? And so by saying, okay, I'm going to learn how to make stuffing this year, you're getting yourself on that track. So I think it's important to have that mindset going into financial goal setting.
And I think that brings up another type of goal that we didn't discuss yet. So like we had savings goals, investing goals, income goals, debt pay down goals. Knowledge goals is a really cool one too. So like, what do I want to learn more about as I go through this coming year that is related to money? So it could be like, I want to learn how to create an effective budget. I want to learn how to identify different types of investments or how to open a brokerage account. So like there are action goals that you can take as well. For learning, for increasing your skills, talking about opening an account, like that would be a different type of goal too. Like that's something that we're like, okay, I want to get XYZ just done. Like there's no monetary amount attached to it. It's just a movement that we're going to make to move us towards where we want to be. So yeah, lots of different types of goals you guys can set, and making sure you're setting some in all those different areas, I think is a really good strategy and important way to make sure you're having rounded goals in all areas. All right, let's move into our Q&A for today. So if you have any questions for us, you're more than welcome to drop them in the comment section on this video. If it's live, we'll try and get to them now. If it's on the replay, Rachel or I will try and get in and answer those for you when we can. But the first one I have comes from Lena. And Lena's like, what should my first financial goal be? Like, I've never done this before. I'm just getting started. What would you do first?
My favorite first financial goal, and this is a little hint, this is the first financial goal that I help my clients set as well, is to have a little bit of an emergency fund, a little bit of something set away just in case you need it. And maybe right now you're not paying for a lot of expenses yourself. You're in a little bit of a unique period of your life where you live at your parents' house. Probably they're buying most of the groceries and paying for a lot of things for you. But having an emergency fund is one of the most critical things that you can do for financial wellness. So if it were me and I were talking to, my nieces and nephews are too little right now to have financial goals. But if I were talking to them, I would be saying things like, hey, let's start by just learning how to save up a little bit of cash for a rainy day that we don't spend. Just knowing that that is money that is only going to be in the case of an emergency. So maybe as a high school, the emergency might be something like you drop your phone and the screen the screen smashes and your parents say, well, you got to pay for that yourself, right? Like you're not taking care of your things. Well, if you had that emergency fund, you'd be able to take some money from that emergency fund and get your phone fixed right away. So my personal favorite first goal for most folks when it comes to having financial goals is simply having a little bit of an emergency fund, even if it's just cash in an envelope that you keep in your sock drawer. It doesn't even if you don't have a bank account yet, it's my favorite first financial goal.
I would probably agree with that. I would say the only other one I would throw in there is I'm going to commit to, for an entire week, I'm going to track every dollar I spend. So like getting in the habit of just keeping an eye on where's my money going and where's it coming from as well. And start with something like a week. That's a very achievable thing to do. Like for 1 week, I'm going to, every time I spend money, I'm going to write it down, what I spent it on and how much. And same thing if I get money. So if someone hands me money, I get it from my job, I find it on the ground, all income logged, all expenses logged. And that's a really great financial habit to build. So, and I think between the two of those, you would have a very solid start to starting to think about your money.
Totally. I completely agree.
All right. Next one coming in. How do I know if it's realistic? Can you answer that question, or do we just have to know ourselves?
Well, I think that you can math your way into it a little bit. So if you have a job and let's say that job pays $10 an hour, you work 10 hours a week as a high school student in that job, you know that in a given month, your gross before taxes income, right, is going to be $400. It's probably unrealistic to say, I'm going to save $10,000 this month, right? So you may want to start by thinking about, okay, what are my sources of income and how can I set goals that are somewhat in alignment with that? And the other thing I want to say, and I am on social media, you will find me there with, posting every day. A lot of social media content creators talk about how they made $10,000 overnight by doing absolutely nothing, right? And so sometimes the narrative around what a realistic financial goal looks like, those videos of I'm 19 years old and I made $7 million last year go very viral because they're really special and interesting, right? But they may not be telling the truth and they may not be a realistic goal for you. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't try or you shouldn't reach for those big, hairy, audacious goals. But I think also looking at your circumstances a little bit and saying, okay, why don't I set myself a goal that feels realistic? And then you can have that reach goal as well, that stretch plan to see, okay, well, maybe I could save of my $400 this month, maybe I'll save 150. And if I save 200, I'll be thrilled.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. Like financially, can I make this work? Time-wise, can I make this work? So if you're like, I'm going to up my hours at my job and I'm going to make $1,000 this month, but you're a full-time student and your job doesn't offer that many hours. So you might be like, okay, well, that's just not actually possible to get the number of hours in this job that I need. Now we could think about other ways around that, but just like, is it possible to hit these numbers that I'm actually talking about? All right. Mira asks, how do I set financial goals if I don't have a job yet? So I don't have income. Do I need to set financial goals?
I personally think that you should be starting to set financial goals, and these can be action-oriented goals rather than savings goals, for example. So if you don't have a job, it's pretty unlikely that you have debt right now, so you probably don't need a debt payoff goal. You may want to set a moderate savings goal if you are a person who happens to get money for birthdays and holidays and things like that. You could set a savings goal from there. But like Rob mentioned earlier, you could set the goal of, okay, I'm going to, with the next, $50 I get, I'm going to open a high yield savings account, for example, which is a special savings account that you can open online that pays more interest and helps your money grow faster. Or I'm going to open my first checking account so I have access to a debit card. Like Rob mentioned earlier, also, you could say, I am going to track all of the money that I spend, even if it's money that my parents gave me, I'm going to track all the money that I spend for a week or a month. I think all of those are perfectly realistic financial goals. And then the other thing is, even if you don't have a job, you might want to do a little research and say, okay, well, what do I think I might be doing when school ends? Am I going to be going off to community college or university? And how much spending money might I want to have in my first year of college, right? So how can I start to think about how much money I would need to save per year after I am old enough to get a job, or I have my parents let me, or I have time, questions, things like that. I think, Rob, I don't know. What do you think?
I would add in some knowledge goals. Like, okay, I may not have income, but I can still go learn. So like, I'm going to choose a book to read that has something to do with personal finance. And maybe that's my goal for the next 3 months, is to finish one personal finance book. So I'm upskilling or I'm leveling up in terms of my knowledge. I also think income goals, like if you don't have income, let's make income a goal. And maybe you're like, I don't have time for a part-time job. Cool. What else can you do that would help you generate income? Can you start a side hustle? Can you start your own business? Are there neighbors who maybe need pets walked or kids babysat or lawns mowed? Something that you're like, okay, that's within my realm of reality, of achievableness, that I could go do this and bring some income in, and then have your plan for what you're going to do when that income does come in.
Definitely.
Okay, so Kai's very solid question. Most adults will ask this too. If I'm getting started, should I focus on saving or investing first? Because they both are really important.
Yeah, so Kai, this kind of goes back to my answer in a previous question. I personally believe, and this is a personal belief, right? Different folks might have a different answer for you, but I personally believe that having a little bit of a nest egg, an emergency fund, is really important. So I would say you can save and invest simultaneously, right? You could put some of your money that you have earmarked for savings towards investments and some of the money towards cash savings. But I personally wouldn't put all of my money into investments unless I had a little bit of a nest egg set aside in case, something happened. And, with investing, of course, you are exposed to losing that money, right? You run the risk of either temporarily seeing the balance of your account go down. That can happen with investing. And you wouldn't want to have that happen at a time that you actually needed that money. So that's why you want to have the emergency funds, so that you have a little bit of time to wait for those investments to grow again, and without having to take them out of the stock market. For example, I'm using the stock market as an investment for the example. An example for the investing. So for me personally, I would either be investing and saving at the same time, or I would save a bit of a nest egg before pivoting into investing personally.
And it's always the case, guys, that the moment you need the money will be the moment that the stock market is down. And that's very typical. Like you think about when recessions come around, so unemployment goes up, the stock market also goes down at that time. So just times are not good economically. And that's not when you want to be like, oh, I'll sell my investments to cover any losses that I have or any money that I need, because you're now selling stuff at a much reduced price. So you're not going to get as much for it as you would as when the stock market is up. So you want to have both. My wife and I, when we started getting serious about money, we made sure that our emergency fund got at least over $1,000 before we started investing. We're like, okay, all in on the savings to get to a minimum mark. And then we still wanted more in our savings account, but now we're like, we can take the foot off the gas a little bit and start putting some into investing as well. So we split and we just keep adding to both every month. And that feels comfortable for us and safe for us. And that's also part of it, is what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel secure, because your financial health and your financial security is also really important. My wife would prefer to have a much larger emergency fund than I would, because it makes her feel financially secure. But that's something you figure out for yourself. Like, what is that number that makes you feel like, okay, I can weather any storm that comes my way? All right, next question for us. This is a really good one again for our age group. Sophia wants to know, should I start saving for retirement while I'm still in high school or college? It's a really long way away. Do I have like more short-term goals that demand my attention first, or should I actually start putting some money aside?
So, Rob, that would actually be the most important question that you would want to ask yourself. So I would say, don't save for retirement in lieu of saving for a big, important goal that you have in the short term. But if you didn't have something really specific that you needed to save for, like, let's say that you were going to get your grandma's car when you turn 16, and you're going to have her car, so you don't have to save for a car, and you're babysitting or you're working and you have income. The thing that's really special about being a student is that you often, not everybody, but many of you, will have fewer expenses right now than you're ever going to have at any other time in your life. And the cost of living, when you kind of get out of school and you start to pay for your own rent and your own groceries and your car insurance and all these things that you may or may not have to pay for right now, can be kind of shocking. So if you are earning money right now, you have a unique opportunity to put money into investment accounts for your retirement and have an amazing length of time for that money to grow. And the length of time that your money is invested is one of the biggest things that will dictate how much that money grows. So if it were me and I had some money and I didn't have a really important pressing goal that I knew I needed to pay for sooner, like for example, if you have to pay for your own university education, I would personally say absolutely, it's very smart to start investing for retirement, even if it's just $50 here and there, like maybe $50 a month or $20 a month. every little bit that you add, especially as a teenager, is going to have an outsized impact on your ability to retire earlier and earlier and earlier. And trust me, when you get to a certain age, that is a very appealing prospect.
And if it's not earlier and you're like, I love work, then when you do get to the point where you don't like work, you're going to have an even bigger egg of money to go spend down and have a great time with. I think if you are a blank slate and you're like, tell me what to do. Like, I will do what you say because I'm ready to do anything. My son, for example, like he's 5, when he makes money, we just say, okay, 1/5 of that. So 20% is always going to go into his investing. So he gives it to me and I put into an investing account for him. And then he's also got his own savings goals. Like he likes to buy Lego and Pokemon cards. He likes to buy board games. So he'll use what's remaining to save towards these other goals. And so creating that habit from the very beginning that no matter what we make, some of it gets lobbed off for investing in the future, and then the rest of it can be used or saved in whatever way you want, is a really cool habit to build for yourself, particularly when you're in high school. And as Rachel said, you don't have to use your income, hopefully, 100% for your needs and wants. Like you've got a lot of discretion over how you spend your money. Can you start building that habit of just putting 10, 20, 30 to 50%? Like if you could do that, that'd be amazing. But can you put some of it aside and say, this is for future me, or it's for me when I want to buy a house, or if I want to have a wedding, things like that. Like it's a future goal. It's a bit further down the road, but I want to start saving for it now and building that habit of investing for the future. And it can be in a retirement account. It can be in a brokerage account. It could be in a high yield savings account, but hopefully you can get started investing. And that's something that I would highly recommend you do. Start building that habit now. All right. Eli wanted to know, same kind of question as the saving or investing, but this one, if we've got debt. So let's say most high school students, the first debt they're going to have is either a car loan, and it might be to a family member, or it might be to an auto lender, or they're going to have student loan debt. Like, would you prioritize paying off debt or saving money first?
Okay, I sound like a little bit like a broken record here, but I personally believe that you need to have some amount of money in savings before you go, kind of full tilt into paying off your debt. So what that really means is you want to be making minimum payments on your debt, and the debt, whoever your lender is will tell you what your minimum payments are. You want to be making minimum payments on your debt and then taking your extra money and saving it until you have an emergency fund. So like Rob said, for some folks, that's $1,000 or $3,000. It sort of depends on where you live and what your cost of living is. And once you have that little bit of a nest egg, then you can take your extra money, and I would personally be putting it towards debt, especially if it's a higher interest debt. So if it's debt above, say, 6%, if it's credit card debt that you maybe accumulated in college, or student loan debt, or it's a car loan, something like that. Now, if the debt has a really low interest rate, like let's say that debt is to a family member and you don't have to pay interest, and you've just agreed you're going to pay that debt back in $100 a month increments or something. If you wanted to, sure, you could pay that family member back sooner if that is something that's important to you and it's important in your family. But if not, in that case, I would personally be continuing to add to my savings and my investments, because that debt's not actually costing you any money. So there's different types of debt, and learning a little bit about interest rates and different types of interest. There's 2 types. There's compound interest and simple interest, which probably you'll learn about in school. Understanding what type of debt you have as well can impact that decision. But for me personally, it's save that little nest egg, whatever that happens to be for you. Maybe it's 500, maybe it's 1,000, maybe it's 3,000. Get that cash into savings, and then pivot and put your extra money towards your high interest debt. So especially if you have credit card debt, that would be the first one I would personally be targeting.
Yeah, because credit card debt is a little bit more more unpredictable than, say, student loan debt would be. You know exactly how much you're going to be paying. So for the folks who get in trouble with credit cards, usually the first thing we want to encourage them to do is to stop borrowing more money. So let's build that emergency fund so that when these mini emergencies pop up that had been going on the credit card, we now have the cash to pay for them. We stop adding to the debt. And then once we've got a solid emergency fund now, like let's really start chipping away at this debt. Let's get rid of it. I love that you brought up the interest rate. So this is a math problem versus anything else. If you are investing in the stock market, particularly the US stock market, on average, you would expect to make about 6 to 8% per year. In recent years, it's been higher. So that's the amount your money is growing each year. Your debt is also growing, as long as it has an interest rate. If it's to a family member, then it might not be. But if it's growing at a lower interest rate, that means that you would be better off in terms of net worth in investing your money versus paying extra down on the debt. You should still be paying at least the minimum or whatever it is to not incur more interest. but thinking about, okay, which is better for me financially? And then also going back to your feelings about it, your risk tolerance for it. So some people, they just don't like debt. They don't like having this thing hanging out on their shoulder. It's like you owe money to someone else. If things go bad, you're still going to have this debt. So they prefer to clear the debts before they really start getting deep into investing. But as we said before, like, let's start making sure that we are saving, investing a little bit at least to take advantage of the time that it's going to have to compound. All right. I love this question from Noah. If my income changes, so I get a new job, I somehow get this big boost of income, should I at that moment just like reset my goals and be like, okay, things have changed. The rules that I was playing by when I made these goals have now shifted, or would you ride out the year and then start out some new goals?
I would change my goals immediately. I would be changing my goals before I got that first paycheck. And the reason for this is that there is something called lifestyle inflation. And what that is it is when you earn more money and you start to spend more money because you can, and you just get used to this new higher level of living, right? And so let me give you some examples of things that might happen to you when you start to earn more money. Maybe you start eating in restaurants more, right? Maybe you start buying more new clothes. Maybe you start, paying for things for your friends, right? Because you actually have the money. And what ends up happening here, and the real secret is that wealth, which is what you need in order to retire, but also that can represent the savings to pay for a wedding, pay for a house, keep you out of debt in case of an emergency. Wealth is money that you did not spend, right? And so wealth is actually invisible. So if you're earning more money and you start to buy fancier clothes, designer clothes, a brand new cell phone, you might look wealthier, but the reality is you're actually not wealthier. And this is how you can even end up getting into debt, is that it can be very hard to know where the boundary is with how much money you can spend, which I know sounds very confusing. If you have a paycheck, you know how much money you can spend. But, with expenses that are, infrequent but happen every couple of years, you can get yourself into trouble. So, Noah, to answer that question, the very first thing I would do is I would estimate what my new paycheck is. Yeah. And I would change those goals immediately. Personally, that's what I would do. I don't know, Rob, if you agree with that.
No, I definitely do. And like, if you know your income is going dramatically up and you've been doing okay with that lower income, how much of that new income can you shave off and put into your savings goals, your investing goals, and still live comfortably? Because as Rachel said, lifestyle inflation is just you increasing the standard of your living to suit your income. And so if you just trim that down a little bit, you can still rise up to whatever that new income is, but you've made it very intentionally. Like, I've already cut the cream off the top of what I want to save or invest, and I'm very happy then to spend within whatever's left. That's a really cool way to budget. I think that's called the anti-budget, actually, if we're talking about different ways to budget. But thinking about before that money comes in, before it even hits your account, where do I want this to go? What do I want it to do? It's one of my favorite parts of budgeting as well, just being very intentional with your money and where it's going. Have that plan in place. So make a plan, reset your goals, all that stuff before the new raise comes in. All right, last question that I see for now is, what are the mistakes you see other people making when they set their goals? So your money coach, what are your clients? What mistakes have they made in the past, or do they still make when you work with them?
Yeah, so Shay, I hope you don't end up in this situation, but a lot of my clients come to me because they have credit card debt and they're struggling to pay their credit card debt off. And what people tend to skip, or the mistake that I see most often, is what I'm going to call kind of the pre-planning that you need to do before you set your financial goals. So in the example of paying off credit card debt, which is a very common thing that is a big financial goal, especially for folks in the US, what people do is they say, okay, I want to pay this debt off. So I'm just going to take a big chunk of my money every month and put it towards that debt. But because they didn't plan to make sure that they were covering all their other expenses first, and they had a good understanding of their cash flow, they had a good sense of their budget, what they end up doing is putting too much money towards their financial goals, and then they run out of money at the end of the month, and they have to go back and use credit cards to cover the last expenses for the end of the month. And so what they're doing is they're paying off the same debt over and over. So they bring the debt down, then they realize they've run out of money and it goes right back up. And so they're just kind of going up and down the same, it's a circle, right? And so what I would say when you're setting a financial goal is make sure you do your homework ahead of time, do your research, figure out, okay, what are the other things I'm going to need to use this money for? So that instead of saying, I'm going to put 90% of my money towards this financial goal, forgetting that, you told your mom you were going to pay for your own prom dress and you have to chip in gas for that road trip that your friend is, driving you guys to, and you wanted to get pizza with your friend, etc. Right? Like, you have multiple financial goals happening. So make sure that you do your research ahead of time so that you can map that goal out and be successful with it.
I love that. All right. When we come back from the answer to our trivia question, I'm going to ask you what your number one tip is for teens to build wealth in the future. And I'm really excited to hear what that is. But let's check in on our answers and see how we did. So $44.40. What did you say, Rachel?
I said $35. I also wrote it down to prove to you that I said $35. I feel like I was pretty close.
That was a good guess. I think that was a really, really good guess. So yeah, like if you think about St. Patrick's Day, I mean, it's not the most festive holiday that we probably have in our calendar year. I'm sure if you line that up against like 4th of July or Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving or Halloween, I'm sure it's probably in the bottom tier of those different holidays, but certainly something that people spend money on and important to think about when you think about your goals. Do you want to spend money on holidays when they pop up? And that could be an unexpected expense if you don't think about it ahead of time. All right, Rachel, what is your number one tip for teens when it comes to building wealth? What advice would you give a teenager right now? Say, hey, here's how you're going to build wealth in the future.
My number one piece of advice is, as soon as you have your first job, open a Roth IRA and start contributing a percentage of your income to that Roth IRA, and make sure that money that goes into the account is getting invested in something. So it's really important to note that a Roth IRA is an investment account, just like a checking account or a savings account. You have to take that extra step to make sure that the money gets invested into some investments so that the money can grow. And the reason I say this, and actually I think Sophia asked the question earlier, should I start saving for retirement? Retirement gets easier and easier it gets harder and harder and harder to save for the longer you wait. So if you put even a little bit of money in when you are a teenager, when you're in university, when you're in your 20s, you will be thanking yourself later. I can't even express to you how many clients come to me in their 40s, 50s, and 60s saying, gosh, I wish I had started saving for retirement sooner. So that's my number one tip, Rob. Open a Roth IRA, or if you're watching this from outside of the States, figure out what the version of that is in your home country, because many countries have something similar, and go ahead and start investing today.
And let's level up that tip and say, open that Roth IRA right now. Like, you don't have to wait to make money to open the account. Let's open it. Let's get it linked to your bank account so that when you do start making money, you can start transferring it in there, and there's no more walls to climb or barriers stopping you from doing it. You are ready. And that's something that I think every high school student should have before they leave high school, is a Roth IRA ready to go and a brokerage account. So you at least have your investing accounts ready for when you do have income to put in there. Hopefully that's now, but if it's not, you're ready to go. All right, Rachel, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, joining us all the way from Portugal, this is a really cool thing. Where can students find you if they want to follow you, hear more from you, learn from you? Where should we send them?
Yes, the best place to connect with me is on Instagram at Rachel_talks_money. I'm also on TikTok, although I'll be honest, a little less active. And if you send me a DM and you tell me, hey, I saw your presentation with Rob, I will write back. So don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I'm happy to answer any questions. Can't give you financial advice, but I can answer educational questions that you may have related to your money and learning how to use your money wisely as a teenager.
All right. That sounds awesome. If you want to find our website, you can go to racheltalksmoney.com and also learn a little bit more. I know you have a great blog that runs there too.
Thanks,
all right.
Rob.
Rachel, thank you for your time. For the rest of you all, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and I hope you go set some goals. So take some time today, this weekend, whenever, carve out 30 minutes, be like, okay, what are my goals? How am I going to achieve those? What are the micro steps I need to take to reach that goal, and start working on it? And don't overwhelm yourself with 100 goals. Stick with maybe 1 to 3 for now, and then build from there. All right, I'll talk to you all soon.